Sunday papers coming at you. So very happy to say Tommy Martin of Virgin Media Television and Dion Fanning, Associate Editor at The Currency, both here in studio. The back pages, as you might imagine, adorned with pictures from Old Trafford yesterday. For instance, Mail on Sunday here, City fuming, heated tunnel row after United joke, Derby goal, sees them snatch comeback victory. On the right hand side of the Mail on Sunday, which is a picture of Marcus Rashford celebrating, as you might expect. US report on Pau is a sham, says Roy Barrett. Roy Barrett has been speaking to the media as he departs the FAI scene. That was one of the comments he made. We'll come to those in a few minutes' time. And then Six Nations will hit Irish rugby fans hard in the pocket. This is, I would say, a routine story which comes up around Irish rugby in particular. So it is a pair, but a pair of Category 2 tickets, for instance, will cost you €250. For your trouble, premium level seats, 180 per ticket. 180 per ticket, so the price there does catch the eye. Sunday World, we have a picture of Marcus Rashford, Mark the Man, 7-up for Ace Rashford as United blow City's title hopes in the Manchester Derby. Interesting comment on the back page of the Sunday World from Pep Guardiola. I don't care in the Premier League. We cannot win. We've won it a lot in recent years, so it's not a problem. So it seemed like Guardiola is almost waving the white flag when it comes to Premier League aspirations. Sunday Independent go with a picture of Joey Carberry being tackled yesterday in action for Munster at Thomond Park. They hung on against Northampton to win 27-23. Munster survived scare, and beneath that the main story is from Jamie Jackson. Ten Hag steers clear of fans' title dreamland. So he says, the fans may dream of a title, we're not, is what Eric Ten Hag says. Sunday at Times then, Magic Marcus, Rashford wins Derby for United as City turn on officials over joke equaliser, is very much the official Man City word on that goal. And then interestingly, it had looked for all the world like Mikhailo Mudryk was going to Arsenal. He was in an Arsenal shirt on his Instagram on Thursday, but Chelsea have swooped in, or they're on the brink of swooping in. They are willing to offer 90 million sterling. And crucially, it seems as well, Arsenal were only willing to give 50 million up front. Chelsea will give 62 million up front. And so it now seems they are swooping in, and Mudryk is going to sign a 7-year deal and is scheduled to fly to London with a view to having a medical. So Chelsea confirmed last night they were discussing terms. Highly rated 22-year-old, lots of pace, scores goals. So Chelsea desperation means they are spending money at the moment. On that, just as we pass off the back pages and get into the inner pages, Six Nations will hit Irish rugby fans harder in the pocket. You turn to page 63, for instance, and the story continues in the Mail on Sunday. So the RFU responded. The point was put in, well, this seems touch excessive, and the RFU make the point that really the France and England games, which are the two home games this year, they have sold out, and they make the point as well, ticket prices start from €25 for school boys and school girls, and then from €40 onwards for adults. The prices are benchmarked nationally and internationally, and they go on to say the ticket prices are also benchmarked against concerts and large-scale cultural events in Ireland and high-profile overseas events. So the breakdown of adult tickets, Category 4 is €80, Category 3 100, Category 2 is 125, Category 1 135, and then Premium is 180. 180. Too steep, or, this is Ireland, go to a concert, do anything with your time, and you'll be paying through the nose regardless.
This is rugby.
Yeah.
I noticed in the Mail they have a little panel of what it could cost you, return car trip from Galway to Dublin, €60. But I was reminded then of the RFU spokesperson and the story about selling pints at the Aviva, pointing out their demographic was different to the Croke Park demographic, which tended to be rural. Okay. And driving off.
Rugby doesn't have
any rural fans.
So when they price it the hotel
you can strike the €60 off because you'd be walking from Shrewsbury Road, or wherever, to go to the rugby match. So that's the quote that's missing. That we feel we've got an audience that will pay this, and they're probably right. They're
sold out.
It's sold out, so you can't actually get these tickets.
No. So certainly any sense that people are voting with their feet with these prices is
the supply and demand.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever, when in the history of Irish sport has anybody ever turned around and said, "That Six Nations is great value." Brought the whole family down. We got a burger.
Yeah, it's not that kind of deal, is it?
No.
It is a pity, though. I've no doubt it must rule out rugby fans right around the country who look at the total cost and say, "Well, that's not
I've
for me."
memory of big rugby fans of my acquaintance who would say that their first memories were the old schoolboy terrace, where it was 2 and 6pence, jump over the turnstile, enduring image, all that sort of stuff. Obviously, there's still school kids tickets available now, but I imagine they're
€25.
25, which isn't terrible
No.
by any means.
No, and I don't know what the prices are for that. I know the family tickets in football for the Ireland Football Internationals are quite good value. Not the child element of it is quite good value.
Yeah.
But I think if it's sold out, because I was reading that story going, okay, this is interesting. They're talking about tickets for the Six Nations, which begins in a few weeks. Like there must be some alarm about these ticket prices. But no, they're all sold out. So you could run this story if you were saying, I wonder if you're saying the 2024 tickets were going on sale at this price, they probably sell out quickly too. So it's and it's also big get. It's France, it's England, it's those games where people that they want to go and see. But it's a huge money spinner. We might talk about the FAI a bit later, but the RFU's great advantage has always been that the Six Nations games, they're guaranteed.
Yeah.
They're big games every year. Like the Irish football team this year manages to actually have some of those glamour ties. But you look through the years, you look the amount of times when you don't have those. If you're the FAI looking at trying to promote games, whereas they always have them.
And the RFU would say that this is their big moneymaker. Certainly in a non-World Cup year, this is where they need to bring in the revenues that gets distributed throughout the game. And you can't have the discussion about funding women's rugby, for example, or funding rugby in non-traditional rugby areas. They would say, without charging the top prices. And if the market is there, then...
Well, I think in their a recent report, maybe not the most recent one, but the men's senior Irish rugby team brings in about 85%, give or take, of all revenue, which keeps Irish rugby at large afloat. So when England and France are coming to Dublin, let's fill our boots is the attitude, understandably but painfully, I think, for anybody who's casually thinking, will I wander up with my family of 5? So Backpage is also full of Manchester Derby and Jurgen Klopp looking very upset and flat, maybe more than anything. Paul McGrath, for instance, in the Sunday World, Theatre Dreams of Glory again. So he says, for the first time in years, Manchester United look like they were the equals of Man City. Now, are they really equals? No. But every journey begins with a single step. And this game told me Eric Ten Hag has Manchester United on the right path. He reckons City, when they went 1-0 up, thought, this is handy, we have the game won. But Manchester United did their thing. I don't believe United will sustain this run all the way to mid-May, he says. Certainly not if any of Rashford, Casemiro or Bruno Fernandes were to get an 8 to 10 match injury. They are the key men now for Manchester United. And he raves as well about Garnacho and says as a centre-half ahead had been drawn out to tackle a lad like that. He can go outside, he can cut inside, you dare and stick out a foot, give away a penalty, give me a big static centre-forward any day instead. So for the first time in quite some time, Manchester United fans are believing this is a genuine turning of fortunes as opposed to brief flicker.
Yeah, I think it's like yesterday was always going to be one of those. It's like the what's the Lennon thing about there's decades where nothing happens and there's weeks where decades happen. It was sort of going to tell you a lot about a lot of teams and a lot of what's happening, and it did feel like a sort of referendum on Manchester United. And after an hour of the game, I kind of thought yeah, it's probably where United are. They're clearly improved, but they're not quite there yet. City been through this so many times before. They know what they're doing. They've gotten on top. They've got their goal, and then as happened, it's funny. I think it was Miguel Delaney who did a piece after the Champions League exit for City last year in Madrid about how often City lose big games with sort of rat-tat-tat 2 or 3 quick goals go against them. They seem to kind of lose their typical males. They get emotional in those moments.
Yeah. They just struggle with that, the men.
Yeah, the men. That's it, you know. So you know that sort of last 20 minutes or so changes your whole sort of verdict and what it says, and you know what it says that Manchester United, and I think all the papers are reflecting this. That I think is it Martin Samuel who has a go at Ralph Rangnick for saying it would take 6 years to turn Man United around, and Ten Hag's done it in 6 months. Like he has gotten rid of all the nonsense out of Manchester United on so many levels, and they just you know that was reflected yesterday. They turned the game around. They won the game. We'll talk about the decision in a minute. It just felt like with City and Liverpool. I was looking at the last 10 minutes of the City game, and I was looking for the surge, you know, the real intense surge, and it was something that it was really flat, and it was a bit lifeless. And I was looking, is it the age profile? Are they over the top? And then I watched the Liverpool game, and I kind of thought, like, maybe these two teams are just like the last 5 years. It's just such a, you know, an incredible heavyweight contest that they both just looked a little bit like yesterday's men, and that maybe, and whereas for Arsenal, for example, and maybe United now, it's all exciting and surging and fresh. We're on the road now. So.
Interesting point. And I don't know if you watched Match of the Day last night, but the analysis was brilliant because they just showed a succession of really lung-busting, decisive Haaland runs and space for the ball to be played, and City just not playing those passes. And Haaland, come on, just run 40 metres for you there. It was really, like, when you saw them in succession, really added up to they were ignoring him again.
And what do you think Pep Guardiola is going to be thinking about Haaland as they get into the decisive stages in the Champions League? And
do I need Bernardo Silva to fill the Haaland area on the pitch is the fear, isn't it?
Can you see?
Punch up on the bench there, lads.
Yeah, can't you see? You can see him sitting behind Pep.
What was interesting about that piece of analysis? I thought it was brilliant as well, because I was watching the game going like, geez, Haaland's not in this game at all. But actually, when you saw all the runs, you're thinking, and it wasn't even hit him with a long one, like, you know. It was like hit him with a slightly early ball. Yeah. But everything we know from Pep Guardiola is he doesn't like early balls because he says take those extra 4 or 5 passes because then we get. Yes. Because if you hit the early ball and you lose it, then suddenly you're vulnerable. Yeah. And that's his whole thing. So
the earlier we play the ball, the more quickly it comes back.
So that's if you know, and the point of that piece that Ian Wright did last night was, if you want to get the best out of this guy, you know. So this was the kind of thing at the start of the season people kind of wondered, would this be a problem? So
yeah, it is interesting.
21 goals in.
21 goals in, he's flopping.
Yeah. Martin Samuel, just to give you a general sense of the tone around Manchester United and Ten Hag, for instance, which does dominate the papers in many ways. He makes an interesting observation, though. His acumen in the transfer market is actually the only area where the jury is out. Lissandro Martinez can't get in the team right now. Anthony does not always start. Malacia has only recently become the preferred left back. I don't even know if he is the preferred left back, really. United have spent money, yes, but that's not the reason for the resurgence. He says Ten Hag stood up firm against the Ronaldo machine. He was prepared to drop his best player, Marcus Rashford, against Wolves on a matter of principle, and here was his reward. He does concede, obviously, that Casemiro has helped enormously. And he concludes by saying, watching from his usual seat, wrapped up against the January cold, Sir Alex Ferguson looked on. With 9 wins in a row, Ten Hag has now equalled the longest winning run in all competitions since Ferguson stepped down in 2013. So this run began on November 10th, which is obviously a long time ago. What are we to read into the weekend, Dion?
I think I agree with Tommy. It's been a pretty exciting and dramatic weekend on a lot of fronts, and the Manchester United story is probably the biggest one of them. It's not just extraordinary from the point of view of Ten Hag and what he has done, but like you look at where Rashford was a year ago, and people were saying United were, you know, might consider selling him. What's gone wrong with Marcus Rashford? All those narratives were kind of dominating, and United looked just adrift then, which they were. And Ten Hag, through things like the Ronaldo, I think even the stuff that he got, I think he hasn't been afraid to kind of look foolish in pursuit of what he felt was important, which is critical. So like, they're bringing them in to run the 13k after the Brentford game, which everyone kind of laughed at. it's him trying to, he's just trying to change the emphasis, and there seems to be, there was such a kind of, there was a danger at United. They were seeing managers out so quickly, and there was a directionless and a sense that, you could just, if you didn't like the manager, don't worry, there'll be another one along in a while. And he's really acted quickly to get key players on his side, or get key players playing for him. It's probably a better way of putting it. And then, just making it clear what he wants, in a little micro way with the Rashford, leaving him out for timekeeping, but Ronaldo being the one, which I think, and again, I can see that must have played very well within a dressing room that's kind of wondering what he's doing, and his attitude and the way he's behaving, to actually say, look, I'm going to deal with this. You don't need to worry about this anymore. And then you get that response. But I also do think it's a very open season. City, as you say, Guardiola seems to be conceding in some ways.
Strange comment.
Yeah. Arsenal are flying. There's no, Arsenal do seem to be the dominant team, but I think everybody with Arsenal is kind of still waiting to see what happens when it slows down, because it's been so exceptional and it's been such a leap. But it is a very open season, because City are kind of, and I agree with Tommy. I think the City and Liverpool thing, I wonder if the battle the two of them had with each other, just kind of kept those relentless years. And they weren't always the COVID season when Liverpool totally dropped off, but those years where each week, they knew they just had to keep winning because the other one was going to win. Those relentless battles. Without that, is there a slight lack of focus?
Liverpool more so than City, to be fair to City, but watching Liverpool, it just looked like, that the whole thing looked like a pain in the arse. The whole I've got to run over here now and close this guy down. Whereas Brighton were just that's the whole thing of that team of energy, team loving life, team on the crest of a wave, and it was just so. Well,
Liverpool have definitely, I think, for a long time, and I think Klopp finally came out last week. Now it's almost like he's still scrambling around trying to find reasons for this. Last week he did say, last season maybe tired us out, which he'd been refusing to kind of acknowledge up until then. But they did look exhausted towards the end of last season too. This was actually kind of in the post towards the end of last season in some of their performances. But they look, again, it's, as you say, people who are possibly tired of having to do the running that they've had to do.
Well, I thought the opening day of the season at Craven Cottage, they absolutely had that attitude that you talk about, Tommy, of do I really have to deal with the enthusiasm of these newly promoted, hard-working types? And that was dressed up as, they'll get into their stride, it will be fine. And here we are several months later. The headline which catches the eye on page 74 of the Mail on Sunday, Klopp, the worst I've ever seen. Jurgen Klopp admits he's never seen a worse performance from one of his teams. The Danny Welbeck goal, I think, was a real low point, wasn't it? It was a real training ground goal, beautifully taken, admittedly, but still. So Klopp said, bad, really bad. I can't remember a worse game, and not only at Liverpool, I really can't. This is really a low point. Extraordinary.
Hard to argue with.
It is, and I think again he seemed to it was quite hard to spot it, but he did make some kind of, again, some tactical change that he kind of then seemed to, acknowledge didn't work.
Thiago further up in midfield, and he said, fully my responsibility. I had an idea with a different formation. It didn't work out, sorry. But he did also preface that by saying, the real problems, though, the same as last week, we don't win key battles. We give the ball away too easily.
Yeah, so he followed up on that point, and that's that thing of, this is all a bit of a pain in the arse. His guys, if you watch that game, as well as the sort of structure of Brighton and the press, and there was also the second balls, that whole thing, that those tackles and second balls. It was exactly what Klopp had talked about during the week, and they were just seconds to all those second balls. There's also a bigger story. Look, there's Liverpool fan sites and podcasts talk about this endlessly, about the whole failure to manage the transition of the squad. It is, you look at the team sheet yesterday and you saw Thiago, Henderson and Fabinho midfield, and you just kind of thought, it's once more onto the breach. and Brighton just devoured them.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's been no that should have been dealt with. Like, and I think they did try last summer to revamp the midfield, and when they didn't, that Liverpool way of, if we can't get the player we really want, we'll just wait, which has worked for them.
Yes.
They ended up signing Arthur on the kind of last day of the transfer window as a kind of panic buy, because they suddenly realised they needed midfielders. And again, all that process-driven stuff that they seem to do so well now seems to be, people are leaving, the sporting director is leaving, there's various things that suggest that isn't functioning the way it used to function. And then, as Tommy says, there is then this tremendous noise. Like, Liverpool and their supporters do noise possibly like nobody else.
Yeah.
So there is, Pep Lijnders, what's his responsibility? Like, this kind of...
Pep Lijnders' book has really become a big issue, hasn't it?
Well, like, you see, I kind of think that stuff is nonsense, because he's his book is called Intensity. His whole game, like this idea that's put out there, he's tried to move towards a technical Dutch midfield away from the hard running. His whole philosophy is about hard running. It's just a way of kind of saying, we're very unhappy with what's going on. We can't actually criticise Klopp, but there must be somebody to blame. This guy's just brought out a book.
John Aldridge agrees with Klopp that the performance was dreadful. Lost the game 3-0. He says, in truth, could have been hammered by more, because they were outfought, outplayed, beaten in every department. He picked out Salah and Thiago. Salah been off pace for most of the season. He says Thiago has too many games like this where he struggles to get involved. He has no impact. But he says after that point, it's harsh to pick out just those two, because he says every Liverpool player was poor at Brighton, and if you asked me to name anyone who came out of it with credit, I couldn't. Liverpool are now in a very dark place. I couldn't even watch the last 10 minutes. On Klopp, he makes the point that there's no bigger supporter of Klopp than me, but plenty of people were suggesting he looked very flat in his press conference on Friday, which is unlike him. Competing against clubs with vastly bigger bank balances must be tiring. And look at the team he sent into battle yesterday. Some of the players as flat as their manager appears to be. That is the other aspect. It must be corrosive to watch the likes of Wijnaldum depart, and to watch the likes of Haaland arrive, and to pick yourself up again to go. So I wonder what you make of Klopp's demeanour this year. He is either fed up with this season and just can't wait for the summer and is itching to go again, or he is fed up.
Fed up, full stop.
Potentially.
Yeah, I think it's one of those... Again, it's very hard in the middle of it. People you make sweeping generalizations, you make sweeping statements. He's exhausted. He's done. But again, again, you did have this to a degree. Now the circumstances were different, and people felt they explained it. But during that COVID season, when Liverpool were awful and scraped into the Champions League,
his mother had passed.
away. He wasn't able to go home. Like, it was grim, and it was football behind closed doors was the antithesis of everything Klopp kind of believes in.
Yeah.
But again, he did rejuvenate and come back. So you would, and he did say on Friday, I think he said, I'm not just here for the open top bus parades and the good times. Like, this is part of it, and you would like to think that that's the way he's thinking, or but it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge to rebuild a side. It's as big a challenge as there is in management, because you're trying to improve. Like, Liverpool got so many plaudits for the way they operated in the transfer market, the players they brought in, but now they're trying to replace the players who they brought in, who were praised, who were the reason for it. And you mentioned Wijnaldum, Mane, various things. Núñez has come in and is extraordinary player, but I'm not sure he was the extraordinary in the way Klopp would have wanted. And it is, I suppose it does depend on what. And the other thing is, the other context is that the club is up for sale.
Yeah.
So how that affects it, how that changes the dynamic.
You'd be reluctant to sort of interpret from Klopp's demeanour big sort of sweeping statements about his future and his state of mind, because I saw somebody tweeted, Klopp looked really flat at his press conference and on Twitter, and press play in the clip, and he just looked like he was giving an answer to a question. I thought, like, this is, you're kind of reaching here a bit. And sometimes I think the shortened lifespan of football managers these days, you kind of you almost can't tolerate sort of longer sweeps or undulations of fortunes. You know, if you look at like sort of Matt Busby's time at Manchester United, like it's what, you know, for example, just as an example, for 20 odd years or however long he was manager, and then you know, there were seasons of seasons of mediocrity, and obviously with the Munich disaster, and then there were seasons where it was just they were gone, they were nowhere. He'd beaten Dockett, they came back, and there was almost this time kind of there was a different concept of time of managers' lifespans, and that maybe you can sort of follow that into other managers like you know, David Moyes maybe, for example, and even Brendan Rodgers, and you kind of think about the concept of time in football these days, where, you know, what is it, 9 months since he was in a European semi-final with West Ham. David Moyes is now on the brink of getting sacked, you know, and I think sometimes with the Klopp thing, to not be almost afforded an understandable season of transition, or a season, 2 seasons of transition even, is kind of reflective maybe of the modern world.
It is, and I think it's sort of underpinned by this total forgetfulness, because one of the other things that happens a lot more these days is that there is some massive change from season to season. You're seeing with Arsenal this year, again, mentioning the Klopp COVID season, that was, you know, that they bounced back from that to have their season last year, which, you know, again, it didn't end how they wanted it to end. But I think those, and it's actually something we might talk about when we talk about Lee Keegan and Eamon Sweeney's piece on them. But what Klopp and Liverpool did last season is everything you want in a football season. It's challenging for everything. It's being there. It's creating these incredible moments. And that was on the back of an appalling season. So
don't feel he's under any pressure.
No, he's only pressure from himself. I think the anxiety from Liverpool fans' point of view would be that he'd just say, I've had enough.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's under any pressure in any other sense, because he's not Brendan Rodgers, he's not David Moyes. He's done it. He's built the team.
Well, on David Moyes, who in fairness did it last year, he doesn't have the same credit in the bank, it seems. Just a brief mention of this. This is the Wolves West Ham match report in the Mail on Sunday. Wolves 1, West Ham 0. So David Moyes walked towards the West Ham fans at full time, applauding those who had made the 6-hour round trip to Molyneux after witnessing another deflating defeat. All he received in return were V signs, F-offs, and a few other insults in return. That's one of those, I think, much like a politician who is getting no reaction from those that he or she is pointing to other side of the camera. With Moisey and the camera on you, you just have to keep applauding to those V signs.
But again, it's one of those great, if he hadn't done that,
he's a disgrace.
He's a disgrace. And I was looking, I don't know if you saw any of the footage of protests outside Goodison last night, and there was Everton fans chasing after, was it Anthony Gordon driving away? Did you see that?
That's what Yerry Mina.
Yerry Mina, that was a fascinating encounter, because they seemed to, like, at one point be very angry with Yerry Mina, but then see him as the kind of the way out. You could be our leader. He's played 2 games this season. But they're chasing Anthony Gordon and saying, "You're not fit to wear this shirt," as he drove away. And I was thinking, well, like, if Anthony Gordon had been sold to Chelsea, they'd be chasing somebody else for selling Anthony Gordon to Chelsea.
Yes.
So it's a pretty it's a pretty thankless position to be in.
That's a good. I don't know if you're moving on to the Martin Samuel piece about Chelsea and sort of cautioning against doing at Everton and sacking a manager because the fans wanted to do so. And his thing is, his whole thesis is that Everton are now a club basically run by crazy cohort of fans, because Moshiri sacked managers based on what the fans wanted, and now the board can't even go to the games, which is kind of unfortunate. I don't think if I was ever owned a football club, I'd like to be able to.
That is grim.
That is, yeah.
I see Martin Samuel's been pitched as the voice of sport, so he's recently joined the Sunday Times. That was Hugh McIlvanney's line, wasn't it?
It was.
Has there been a voice of sport since McIlvanney?
The belt has been vacant, I think.
I think it has, hasn't it?
I think Martin Samuel and David Walsh scrapped for it in the pub.
We don't enter into that world of egos. Who was the first? It's the kind of thing I think that's
Would that
there's
have
a
been
certain type of
negotiated?
English sports journalist would
In his contract, I think it had to be.
they
Do
would
you think that
argue.
was negotiated? Like, if I'm coming, I'm the
It's
voice
like
of sport
getting
for one.
the 7 jersey.
Kind of. Interesting, anyway. By the way, very briefly, last one on all the football from yesterday, which does kind of dominate the front pages, just on the decision, the offside goal, or not offside goal, which was given for Manchester United. Stuart Atwell getting lots of criticism. Manuel Akanji, for instance, first goal's a joke. Manchester City's Akanji. First goal is a joke. Rashford's clearly offside, so I played him offside. He runs up until the last second. He only stops because Bruno's coming in behind him. I understand he doesn't touch the ball, but he runs for 30 metres chasing the ball and then he stops. The ref didn't look at the situation. Ref didn't say anything to me, but I talked to the linesman and he said, did Rashford touch the ball? I love that the linesman is asking Akanji for his perspective on what happened. Did Rashford touch the ball? And I said no, but he's chasing the ball for a long time. And he says the referee has to at least look at the situation. It seems inside... Peter Walton, who was on BT Sport, he's in the Sunday Times, he's saying definitely was a goal. The questions you ask: 1, has the player played the ball? So that's no. 2, has he attempted to play the ball? That's no. 3, has he interfered with an opponent? Not directly, I suppose. 4, has he attempted to interfere with an opponent? No. Therefore, it's a goal for him.
I would say yes to all of those.
Isn't there an argument? So it's funny. I had the same instinct as Rio Ferdinand. So they have a box of all the people with their various points. Rio Ferdinand, he hasn't touched the ball, and I think that my instinct when I watched the first replay was, let's see, did he touch it at all? And then I think, well, you can be in possession of a football without touching it.
He's in control of the ball.
He kind of is controlling the situation.
If you watch it again,
ushers the ball. He's like a burly minder, with a Hollywood starlet on the red carpet, sort of just ushers the ball into Fernandez's path.
Well, or centre half,
but he gets out
allowing the ball run out of play over an end line.
Well, he doesn't need to touch the ball because of the pass and because of his pace. But if you watch the run, he is completely in control of the ball. If he needs to do anything with the ball. If anyone else wants to get the ball, they need to deal with Rashford.
He reminded me of in a game a 2-touch where he's taken his first touch and then was dribbling without dribbling, but was still in possession. So I think Man City maybe were
and everybody is, and he's not like that's why I think is he interfering? He's running with the ball.
Yeah,
he is running. The fact that he hasn't touched it doesn't matter. And so every Manchester City defender is responding to the situation as if Rashford is on the ball. They're not responding to it as if anyone else, or there's a 50-50 for the ball. They're responding to it. Rashford is on the ball. Ederson comes out to deal with Rashford. Everything is to deal with, he is on and the ball is at his feet.
Yeah.
So it's one of those. It's just stupidity. I will wait. I'll wait and see what Richard Keys has to say tomorrow because
final verdict. And there's the voice of sport.
He'll have something to say about this.
There's a column in that.
Yeah. But
everything you need to know about this is Peter Walton is quoted in the Sunday Times. The officials came to the right decision over awarding Bruno Fernandes's equaliser, and here is why. He goes into it. And then Keith Hackett, who former referee, I think former head of referees, possibly, might be wrong on that, is in the Telegraph, the Sunday Telegraph, which is also used in the Sunday Indo. There is no doubt Marcus Rashford was offside. He impacted on play and he was interfering with an opponent. So to allow the Bruno Fernandes equalising goal to stand was a total nonsense. So yeah, and I think Gary Lineker made the point on Match of the Day last night, where the change in the sort of wording is from that whole thing of interfering with play, and was it Bill Shankly who said if he's not interfering with play, what's he doing on the field? To this thing where they want now to have very precise and non-subjective wordings, so that because we're in the world of black and white decisions, VAR, it is now that sort of 4-step process of wording now that you read out there from Peter Walton, and the follow-on for that is that can you ever get to a non-subjective decision? And this
didn't go to VAR. I am stepping on Richard Keys' toes, but this didn't go to VAR. Am I right? Because Howard Webb has now taken over.
I think you just got the word down. This is the deal. and proceed. You don't need to come over and look at it. Oh, I think it did go. I think they did check it though.
I don't know if they did. I'm not, like, well, would they not? But he wouldn't go and he doesn't go and have a look. That does.
He gets the word in his ear.
So because I was thinking, like, the linesman made one decision, then they overturned that. Could they then have overturned the overturned decision?
Oh yeah, they could go on forever.
Yeah,
I would think.
So he didn't go.
I don't know.
Typically, if to overturn a decision, it was left to the referee to go to the screen, whereas yesterday
it was a conversation between the linesman
and he overturned it.
And was there VAR?
And that's a Howard Webb directive.
Apparently, the bar for going to the screen is higher now.
Okay.
But which is kind of ludicrous because it's just, well, go and have a look, and just what's wrong with going to look at the screen? That's what everyone else is doing.
We'll come back to football. So a few other pieces. For instance, David Walsh, back page of the Sunday Times, just reminds us it's Craven Week in South Africa, and therefore doping and South African rugby is a talking point. Doping cases raise questions around famed South African physicality. So he says, and this is actually, I mean, his main piece is about the shenanigans in French sporting administration, football in particular, this week, and rugby obviously with Bernard Laporte. So there's just a side piece. This isn't an overly long piece, but he just notes the latest findings from Craven Week. Craven Week is where the best young players in South Africa effectively audition for a future in rugby. He says to believe in what they're achieving, 3 World Cups from 7. He's 3 World Cups from 7. I mean, it's mad. We need to accept that their size and strength have nothing to do with drugs. This is the same for every rugby team, but there's a qualification. South Africa has a serious problem with doping at elite schools level. Last week, the South African Institute for Drugs-Free Sport revealed that 3 young players were banned after positive tests at the SA Schools Interprovincial Competition. This competition is better known as Craven Week. It's the most prestigious schools competition on the calendar. 2 of the players were named. The third was a minor, could not be identified. One of those who tested positive was a student at Grey College in Bloemfontein, which is one of the most admired rugby schools in South Africa. So 2 of the banned players tested positive for an anabolic steroid, which has a long sporting history. It was one of the drugs used by Ben Johnson way back in Seoul in '88. For bodybuilders and weightlifters, this steroid has been the drug of choice. The third positive from Craven Week was another anabolic steroid. These are serious drugs that change the physiology and aggression levels of athletes. All 3 were given 3-year bans from the sport, and neither was this the first Craven Week that has turned up positive tests. So in 2018 there were 6 positives. That was a big story at the time. There were 6 positives in 2018. There were 3 in 2014. There were 5 in 2015. 4 in 16, 3 in 2017. So a fairly consistent pattern. And David Walsh concludes by saying, let us state the blindingly obvious here. When drug testers come to an event, they take samples from a relatively small number of those involved. The actual number of athletes involved in doping will always be greater than the number of them detected. There is to a blindingly obvious question. If doping is so prevalent at elite schools level in South Africa, how can we be certain that those at the highest level of the adult game have not benefited from doping at one time or another? So that's basically the extent of the piece. He's asking the pertinent question. Unfortunately, it's very hard to come up with a precise answer, but this shadow which is over South African rugby and has been for some time remains. It's another Craven Week, and once again there are more positive tests from a relatively small sample size. I've spoken to 1 or 2 people off the record who've spoken to people in South Africa, and they would have a sense. I don't want to spit out a percentage and risk libeling all these minors at Craven Week, but certainly the percentage that is suspected might be positive at that level is eye-watering. So this is an issue for obviously South African rugby, but certainly the game as well, when we're talking about 3 out of 7 World Cup wins.
And you're also talking about an even bigger issue in terms of rugby, and because of the head injuries and various things, and increased size and increased physicality and increased power, what that does. It's not their key thing with that, but at the same time, it's a serious issue. I mean, you have these, and this is the question, like what happens if people are telling you that, if people are saying this is the extent at which it's going on, do these guys, as they get older, then just say, God, let me put away those childish things and
go clean.
I guess
the other aspect is once you establish the power and the muscle, it's much more doable to sustain it. I mean, that's been one of the issues with the length of bans is that the gains of doping far outlast the bans. So, you do a good cycle of doping at 17, 18, you could be feeling the benefits of that still at 25 and beyond. That's another issue.
And you've also given yourself a springboard into the professional game at that point, which is, again, like as we see in lots of sports, cycling being the great example of it, the need to get a professional contract or to get a contract is probably it's not to cheat to win necessarily, it's to cheat to have a wage.
That's your lottery ticket.
Yeah.
It's probably, if we talk about the Owen Farrell thing, I think one of the things we're going to talk about is how serious rugby authorities are to deal with these massive problems. And Dion's right that this sort of the idea of doping and physicality and size is linked to the bigger debate about head injuries and concussion and physicality in general. But this South African stuff feels like it's been not sort of, it's beyond whispers now. I mean, this is a
trend for a decade.
A trend for a decade. It's been discussed. There was a huge talk about it here when that Munster player, whose name
Gurban Grobler.
Yeah, and that whole issue. I know people like Paul Kimmage have felt that rugby has an omerta about drug taking. You talk about 3 World Cups in 7 goals for South Africa, and you kind of wonder how seriously it's been taken. If it is that much of a problem, like I'm like you. I've had conversations with people who know a lot about these things, and how there's a thing where young South African players, they call it going to the fridge, which is like a thing where when you're at that point where it's like you need to get size. That was a phrase that somebody used to me. That's again a conversation, but is all this is this all that well known? Is it so well known that these conversations are leaking out everywhere? And if so, is there a sort of concerted effort at a high level to kind of say what's going on here? Is this, when you talk about this Craven Week story, is this just something that's tolerated? I mean, David Walsh's point is that 3 were tested positive. What was the percentage that we're actually using in this thing? And it's not going away.
And again, you say the more serious issue about head injuries, which is right, Dion. You're also talking about lots of young men doing themselves irreparable harm in the long term by taking this muck and putting it into their systems, all in a quest to, as we said, win the lottery ticket. So, who knows what issues they'll have in the long term, which is another aspect of this. So, pretty grim. The Owen Farrell piece, the Observer have I borderline exclusive on this, but certainly the RFU and Steve Borthwick and Owen Farrell have found a way to ensure that he'll make the Scotland game.
It does. Without wanting to, it reminds me of the story you would read around sort of an All-Ireland final or some
Yes.
the way GA suspensions used to be.
You wake up to find Jim Connolly is cleared to play. Yeah, that kind of a thing. They call it, the Guardian, the Observer, describe it as a remarkable intervention from the RFU, and it's cleared Borthwick. He can put Owen Farrell in his squad on Monday without jeopardising his availability for England's game. So in short here, the initially given 6 weeks, mitigation gets that down to 4, tackle school gets that down to 3. There were 3 games between now and the Six Nations. Traditionally, that third game, the week before the Six Nations, is not one any of the English players would be anywhere near a week out from a Six Nations. So there was a question mark, well, can that really count as one of his 3 games? And there was a wonder, well, maybe he won't include him in the Six Nations squad until belatedly after the game, in which case that third game will count. But it seems that with the uncertainty that Farrell's ban would be updated to include the Scotland fixture if selected in the squad, the RFU has written to Saracens to confirm he is available for that third match that he can't play due to his suspension.
And which he wouldn't have been playing in
anyway.
if he was available to play for England without suspension.
It reads like the RFU has said, now look, I know he never plays in that third game, that game before the Six Nations, but we're just writing to say to you, he is available.
But you can't pick him because he's suspended.
Yes. But he's available. I mean, by all England, if you want him,
it's a shame.
He can play.
It's a shame he's suspended.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you guys will be able to pick him for this match. because he wouldn't be playing
So
for England.
the press release with the team news from that week would be
Owen
Farrell
Farrell suspended. Yeah, but England wished him the best that week.
Yeah.
I'm not outraged, really. This is just the chicanery of
But
sport.
again, it's like, and it is like you're seeing more red cards in rugby. You're seeing, and there's a very good reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a really important reason, and he's going to tackle school. I remember in England, having to go to. I went to speeding school for when you get points on your license in England, you can go to speeding, an all-day speeding class.
The question I have is how no sports journalist has written the piece about attending tackle school yet.
Didn't Bundy Aki go to tackle?
I think so.
School to get a week off his.
I think so. I mean, the two things you 100% do are apologise to the person you've nearly decapitated. Mm-hmm. In general terms, I'm not talking about Bundy Aki or Owen Farrell here. Apologise. That's the mitigation.
Yeah.
And then secondly, tackle school.
And what goes on into what goes on in
tackle school stays?
I mean,
but
there's a hell of a question.
There's been a lot of jokes, and it's kind of it's like police academy sort of carry on there. But what I think was it Malachi Clark in a piece about it. I don't know whether it was Brian O'Driscoll who said it on here during the week, but. What are they learning there that they don't know? Like Owen Farrell's playing rugby since the 1990s. What is he learning there about tackling and the do's and don'ts and how to tackle that? It's been a great course.
Yeah.
But the point about this, and when it's the RFU doing this, and maybe I'm sure there are different arms of the RFU involved in different things. But if you're serious about this. You want the sporting bodies to say, right, this is unfortunate, but he's going to miss some Six Nations matches. Otherwise, the jeopardy for making those tackles and for doing those things is diminished.
Yeah, fair point.
And
that's the bottom line.
That is the bottom line. Like if you're going to be serious about this stuff, you want the governing bodies to understand the seriousness of it, not make a quite a smart manoeuvre, which the player will appreciate. And if it was, if he'd been sent off, if you got a suspension for dissent or something, you would kind of say, okay, well look, this is I don't know what you get sent off for in rugby, but this is as far as I understand, this is part of the serious attempt to actually reframe how the game is, the physicality of the game and how tackles take place and all that critical stuff.
I know, but it's Scotland and the Six Nations.
Yeah.
No dissent in rugby, by the way.
Dissent. Apologise.
Yeah, I won't be.
Sir. Across pages 10 and 11 of the Sunday Independent, Tommy Conlon grapples with the question that the nation asked itself across the early part of the week. What did you make of that Roy Keane interview? Stalemate in a clash of cultures. Navan's Sigmund Freud, Tommy Tiernan, discovers that Roy Keane's defensive game is still as strong as ever, writes Tommy. So he says, Tommy Tiernan was looking for buried treasure. He was on a search for the child inside the legend, for that inner chamber where he could unlock Roy Keane's psychic wounds. But the Navan Sigmund Freud was dealing with a horse of a different colour here. The Cork man wasn't for opening those kinds of doors, maybe for the simple reason that there are no such doors inside him to open. And Tommy talks at length about how Tommy Tiernan just about stays on the right side of being a gushing fountain of mush and sentiment where feelings are everywhere and intellect is nowhere. He has enough self-awareness and humour to just about keep on the right side of that. Crucially, therefore, his guests seem to trust him intuitively. They come to him anticipating a deeper dive than normal. They are ready to offload their sins, as it were. But as he found out with Roy Keane, Tommy was yet another player who wasn't getting much change out of him. For all that one might scoff at the standard narcissism of your show business fauna, theirs is a tough school when work is scarce and nobody wants to know you. But it's a kindergarten compared to the school that Keane came out of and ultimately conquered. So he recalls some of the interview. It's like looking at myself, the Tiernan joke at the start when the two beards looked at each other. But ultimately, this was a clash of cultures between someone who's a talker and someone who's a doer. It was a clash of cultures between a man who is all words and a man who's all action. Tiernan may be the emblem in this country for a certain kind of touchy-feely masculinity that is currently fashionable in the hipster quarter, but Keane is the emblem for the kind of alpha male that many young men would still love to be. One would guesstimate that the latter cohort, that's the alpha male, is much larger than the former. It's just that they have no voices amongst the chattering classes who dominate the discourse. Keane is their man. He's the living embodiment of that most old-fashioned of archetypes, the man in the arena taking on all corners and beating them all. And he says that anytime Tiernan went all lovey with him, Keane reverted to type. He is an institutionalised professional sportsman at the end of the day, Clive. There's only so far he can go with the namby-pamby stuff, in all fairness. How much did you cry? Asks Tommy, sharing and caring. How did it affect you emotionally? Did you cry? Keane, politely incredulous, asks, when I was playing? Yeah. Insert eye roll emoji here. No, comes the reply. Every question of this nature went further down a Keane-shaped cul-de-sac. Relationships with his missus, his children, his dogs. Does he find the unconditional love of a dog inspiring? OFFS, says Tommy. No. And all is grand with the wife and kids too. Thanks for asking. Keane is not playing ball with this game of maudlin virtue signalling. So, Tommy Conlon, I think of the opinion most people were this was oil and water trying to do a dance, and not uncompelling for that, but certainly you'd love to know what Tommy Tiernan thought privately afterwards.
Well, yeah, I've been amazed at I watched it and I did...
As a matter of interest, live or afterwards? Live. Oh, great. Yeah, I watched it live. I think the people who I spoke to who watched it subsequent to hearing about how difficult an interview it was came away with the far brighter summary.
Right.
Saying, people said it was a car crash. It was fine. But if you watched it live and you thought, wow, this Tommy Tiernan, into the Roy Keane cave, this could be fascinating. I think those people had a dimmer view.
Yeah, although a couple of people I know who watched it live thought it was fantastic.
Right.
And thought everything about it was fantastic. I thought it was compelling, and always with Keane, you're trying to understand. And I like Tommy Conlon's piece is hilarious and is very good. It's very good. There's elements of it I don't agree with in terms of Keane, because I think even in this interview you're kind of trying to analyse, why is Roy being like this? What has Tommy done? Like, Roy isn't like this with Micah Richards. And I think there is something in that. And again, maybe he does. I think there's and you're trying to look at it, but there's always something. You're always trying to, as Tommy says, the Cork man wasn't for opening these kind of doors. You're always trying to look into those doors with Keane. And I actually think there are those doors. There is something in there. Like, I think
that's just your touchy-feely masculinity that's currently in vogue in the chattering classes.
It is, yeah. Well, I do feel that when I saw that about, what was it? There is a certain when naturally Tommy also wanted to talk about Daddy, and I was like, how many interviews have I done where I've asked people about their father?
I do think he's a more straightforward person, though, than we might like to believe. I think we dare to hope there is a philosopher in there.
No, but I think that's I know. Maybe there's not. There is.
Disagree with you more, Joe.
Yeah, I couldn't, and I think there's a line here that jumps out because now Tommy doesn't write it, and I'm going to take a leap a little bit. He says, Keane is the emblem for the kind of alpha male that many young men would still love to be. Right. There's another way that people often say that in colloquial language. They say he's the kind of man I'd love to go for a pint with. Right? Mm-hmm. That's what people say about Roy Keane. Except Roy Keane wouldn't go for a pint with you because he doesn't drink.
And he doesn't like you.
Well, forget about that. But he doesn't drink, and he stopped drinking. And the story, and the fact that he did that, when he did that, is something that is of interest. Now, Keane has never really, and I've written about this. Keane has never really gone into it. When he brought out his second book, he talked about it in terms of it being a lifestyle change. He was eating kind of steamed vegetables, and he wanted to prolong his career.
Yeah.
Now, knowing and even he touched it on the interview. He didn't go to the hacienda. He was a kind of he was going to going to the pubs kind of man, and that was a hugely significant thing for him to do. Now, whether and I think it would require some sense of wrestling with who you are, because I don't think when you've done that, I don't think you stop doing that without that sense of who you are becoming, whether you like it or not, it presents itself to you. and you've got to find a way to negotiate yourself in this new world compared to the world you always lived in. So, whether the fact that Keane doesn't, and it's entirely within his rights not to, the fact that he doesn't address that doesn't mean it's not there. He's not.
Fair enough, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean though that if you ask him, for instance, about his love of dogs, and or like what have you found difficult about parenthood, like, that doesn't mean that there's a great depth there necessarily either, just because he's grappled with that one aspect of his life.
No.
And like there was the point where Tommy said to him, "The question is too hard for you." You know, there's that joke, because I think he does find. You know, the way people approach him a little tiresome, as if there are these grand depths to be excavated.
No, I think that's true, and I think it's actually, and it is interesting in terms of how he's become, the type of TV personality he's become, and the way he does seem like Micah Richards to a certain degree, like Ian Wright, who he's clearly, and Ian Wright is Ian Wright is such a lovable, like an admirable person. So he's not just a kind of TV character, but Keane has clearly got a great love and respect for, or love might be too strong, but a great respect for Ian Wright and a friendship with Ian Wright, which you wouldn't, especially in Ireland, we probably wouldn't have anticipated that, because you think, oh, Roy will go for the
Soonest or something.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's because people, you know, they don't come to him with maybe like, I thought the thing that Tommy Tiernan was coming to him with was, he was coming to it Ireland's fascination with some of the stuff you talk about, and the idea that Roy Keane does have something to say about this. Now, again, I do think there are doors inside there, but I agree with you. I think Tommy Tiernan was looking at this, and I think Keane sometimes finds that difficult or irritating, that there is a kind of, in Ireland, we invest so much into him, and we've always had, and for obvious reasons, when we invest this, you know, this huge hinterland and this huge significance in the most ridiculous way. When you look back on it, on stuff people said, you know, he was given the credit for the Celtic Tiger. You know, Roy was the embodiment of the new ambitious, thriving Ireland,
yes.
Like, you know,
the
standards, all that kind of stuff. Like that was so we've always put a great weight onto him.
Yes,
and I think there was almost in the moment when he walked out, and again I'm doing it now by highlighting one little moment in the interview. But when he walked out and Tommy Tiernan stood there, kind of looking at him, there was almost like, again, I think Roy almost sensed this. Here we go. This guy is looking at me like I'm the Godhead. Whereas, you know,
here we go.
You know, whereas Micah would be over with Micah would be making some banter about his trousers or something.
Maybe, yeah.
I'm letting Dion take the lead on this because I was away last weekend, and so I haven't seen the interview.
Okay.
And I had intended to watch it back, but everything that everybody said about it, I kind of felt like it wasn't worth watching back, because I used to have a long-running, I used to have a real frustration about Roy Keane because of what you just talked about there, about how he'd done 2 autobiographies and had been an intensely interesting public figure for so long, and the thing with the drink, which I think is you've absolutely spot on in terms of that whole side of his life that he issued, that he dealt with as an issue. And he has never once opened one of those doors. And, you know, so I would agree with you, Dion. I take issue with the line that there are no such doors inside him to open. But I've since kind of gone, you know what? He seems happy in himself. He's someone who's comfortable in his own skin. He's a happily married man with children who love him, who's intensely private about his life. Whatever he has dealt with, he has dealt with. Whatever fueled him in his past, whether there are dark doors, things behind dark doors, fueled him and continue to fuel him to this day. But good luck to him. And so that's that frustration that I used to have. God, he's done 2 autobiographies, and I still don't know what made Roy Keane Roy Keane. You know, I think what that interview tells us, we're just going to have to lump it. And you know, the Tommy Collins piece is interesting as well, because it is that he's talking about this whole thing of the touchy-feely masculinity versus the old strong silent types. You know, the Tony Soprano line about what happened to Gary Cooper and the strong silent type. You know, why do you have to? And you know, there's a lot of people whose main product that they sell these days is themselves. You know, their own life and their own what's happened to them and their own dealing with it, and which is, you know, in a lot of times they do it to raise awareness about different issues and different things, and mental health is all about being open and talking about things. But when somebody comes along and is quite clearly saying to you, here's the terms of engagement, I'm a football man talking about football things, and whatever I've done, you know, none of his family have ever been in the public eye. That story about Teresa and the date is as much as we've ever got.
Yeah.
And you just have to, and you kind of have to say after all that, you know, fair enough.
But see,
that's coming from a member of the touchy-feely Liberati.
What did you say? You said to me outside, I feel seen.
I feel seen, yeah.
How Tommy analyses there, I fully agree with. Except I do think that the reason, and this isn't just in Ireland, because you watch even the Gary Neville interview he did on the overlap, and when you've talked to him and various things, one of the reasons for people's fascination with Keane, even when he's walking on a kind of sunny day through kind of some fields in Cheshire with Neville, is what's going on, like what's the backdrop to that story. Or what's the story behind that story? Because it isn't Alan Shearer. You know, like when Alan Shearer comes out and talks about things, you think, well, yeah, this is what you see is what you get. And I'm not really interested in what I get beyond that. Whereas with Keane, I think the reason, and this isn't an Irish thing, it's true about, it's why he's become such a personality in the UK, is because people feel, now maybe it is, I'd love to go for a pint with him, or maybe it's that anger or whatever, but they do feel there's something there beneath it, or there's more to it, or, you know, even when he's talking about his profile, or, you know, all that kind of stuff, that there is a world view that informs it, and you know, even going back to the you know, I remember that David Walsh interview where he's going to the match at Wigan, and he showed up, and you know, the reason that story was so funny was because you're investing an awful lot in what you think is underneath with Keane. And I think that's because there is something there. Now, like, you know, but there was something there with Gary Cooper too. He was keeping it hidden, but there is something there. I think that's why he has that. And if there wasn't something there, I don't think people would be as interested.
Mm. You get glimpses sometimes. Do you remember in the Roddy Doyle version of the book, it was just a throwaway paragraph, and yet it was so interesting, where he talked about going to matches. You reminded me of it there when you mentioned Wigan. As he would do, he'd go to matches on his own, and he was making the point that generally people are very friendly and has no problem with that. But he said in the book, not to quote him verbatim, but he said he's always waiting for somebody, though, to say something smart or to offend him in some way. And the really interesting part was, he said, I hate that about myself. It was never really expanded on. So you get the very occasional nugget, but in the main, he just has no interest. My sense of talking to him was super bright for sure, understood the game that he was playing with the audience and with everyone around him. But anytime even you asked a question with a view to where it might lead in a question's time that might be in any way intimate or in any way revealing, you could just see the eyes dart. He totally, he could see it coming a long way away and had absolutely no interest in going there. Even if at times going there might be applauded or you know, would generate a reaction from an audience, which would further his ego.
A great example of that, Joe, was a few months ago. Sky had a big night on Monday Night Football about mental health in football. I can't remember what the incident or the story that was linked to, but Roy was on with Jamie Carragher, and the set piece was David Jones asked Jamie Carragher to talk about did you ever struggle, with mental health issues? And Jamie Carragher told a story about how sometime in his career where he felt he had to go and speak to someone, and if he felt speaking about it helped and got him through, and he was much better afterwards. And he turned to Roy and said, "What about you, Roy? Were there ever any time where you struggled and all that?" And he just gave the most straight bat, completely. I was trying to think of a cricketer that. Graham Gooch sort of. Sometimes after a bad defeat you'd be a bit down, but you get on with it. And he just did not go there.
Not going there.
Did not go anywhere into that whole realm.
He's never gone there, and I suspect he never will, to be honest. As you said at the outset, as is his right, and yet there's this thirst.
Because we know
the latest edition to go there, but
because we know that there is something. We know,
and we also might be overestimating what's there as well.
No, that's fair enough. And I think again, it is entirely his right to do whatever to have dealt with whatever he's dealt with. However, he doesn't need. And when you said, like you might ask him a question, even if. The answer, the answer he could give would be one that would make him look good, or like that's a reason in Roy Keane's head for not give that answer.
It's an extra barrier, maybe.
The idea that he would do something that makes himself look good or gets himself some plaudits for those kind of things is alien to him.
The reason why this is such a good piece, whether you agree with it or disagree with it, and what a good column should do or a good piece in the Sunday papers is it makes you think about something bigger, and where Tommy Conlon goes with is he brings up that thing about that Tony Soprano thing of do we have to talk about everything? Does everything have to be out there? And does that allow a certain amount of showbiz lovey gushing fountain of mush and sentiment? Not is there a lot of phony going on there, and is there a lot of what happened to the man of action, the person who went and just did things and got on with things? And you can sort of you can spend the rest of your Sunday sort of thinking about that and kind of going like, well, and then somebody else can come back and say, no, that's complete bollocks. I mean, people are suffering from mental health stuff for decades because they wouldn't talk about. The stuff that
Strong Silent Type was obviously not always having a good time. Well, I remember at the start of the overlap. Sorry, just jumped into my head there. The interview with Neville, which I think is one of the best Keane interviews you'll ever see. The one with Neville, he's relaxed, he's walking, he's with somebody he trusts inherently. I'd be curious, Tommy, if you do watch it. Like, there's definitely a degree at the start of the Tommy Tiernan interview of, again, the eyes are darting. He's trying to think, where is this unusual question? Where I haven't had that one. Where's that one going? What do I need to guard off there? So there's a degree of feeling him out. Whereas with Neville, there's obviously an instant trust, and that goes a long way. But I think it might have been as innocuous a question as, he does like the quick fire, and it was like, who's your hero, maybe? And I think he had meant superhero, and ultimately Roy said the Hulk, which made Neville laugh. But I think Roy's initial response, and it's early on in their 2 hours together, is, Nev, that's a bit deep, isn't it? Yeah. And it was a real no. A bit deep.
I know. Well, that is like the bit about the. Naturally, Tommy also wanted to talk about Daddy. It is very funny when he says,
or you were looking for a father figure.
Or you're looking for a father figure. At which point we reach a sort of comical parting of the philosophical ways. Again, the answer is no. A fairly curt no at that. Then perhaps out of politeness, he throws him a bone. But I was surrounded by good senior players. There was Tommy T trying to go all John McGahern on him, and here was Roy going all old pro. The pair of them completely at cross purposes. Tiernan wanted to discuss their father issues. Keane ended up talking about Scholesy, Butty and Giggsy. And that is it. Like, you're right. Like, he doesn't. He's not going to give it to. You've got to. You've got to try.
No, you've got to try. And I'd much prefer Tommy tried. Like, that's what made it compelling, was to watch the tug of war. I would love, by the way, one last thought. Again, Tommy, if you were to watch it, it'd jump out at you. The way he downplays his own talents has now almost descended into parody. I mean, it's like, I was okay. I wasn't a very good player, but we worked hard. And that was like, he must have said that half a dozen times over the 45 minutes. This is a guy who Wayne Rooney says was the best passer he ever played with. Kenny Cunningham was on the show just this week, and honestly was almost in tears talking about the quality of Roy's first touch. I'd love, again, if we're out for a pint, to turn to him and say, I'm calling bullshit in that. You were awesome, don't you? Like, how good a passer you were, a good player. Do you actually think you weren't technically top? I'm not saying you were Zidane, but you must know how you do think you're a lot better than you let on, don't you?
Yeah, and like it is.
What's the answer to that? I'd love to know.
Well, it's almost you're going to reach a point. Maybe he'll have to, but he'll reach a point of such overbearing modesty that it'll become almost like it's like he's kind of actually singing his own praises, because people are going, well, come on, this is ridiculous. Now we have to talk about how great you were to compensate for you refusing to acknowledge.
Maybe it's longer.
It's like he was saying things, like he did say, no, because Tommy made the point, which again is key to an awful lot of this. Like, he was captain of Manchester United during their greatest years in their history. That didn't happen by accident. Like, Alex Ferguson didn't walk into the room and just fling a.
We've 10 good players and the Make-A-Wish winner here from Cork.
There was reason for that, and Keane again downplayed it. It was very easy to lead those players. But that's not. It is if you've got the talent and the drive and everything that he had.
I think those players would be the exact types who wouldn't be led by just anyone. We've gone too long on Roy Keane. To round things off, a couple of GAA pieces. Joe Brolly is railing against the systematic fouling that he has seen far too much of late. He mentioned the Kilmacud game recently, whereby there's an initial grab at the elbow or pull of the jersey to slow down the player, but not enough to give away a free, and it's been mastered. And he just thinks something has to be done in GAA very, very soon. It's, and also just the tactics are miserable and he's just not enjoying football at all. And then there's Eamon Sweeney extolling Lee Keegan. As most people did all week, I guess the problem for a Sunday paper writer, I think he probably picks out a great analogy, doesn't he, for Keegan and for Mayo, The Boys of Summer, probably the finest book of all time. Roger Kahn wrote it about the Brooklyn Dodgers, 1940s, 1950s, perhaps the most beloved of all baseball teams. And if you look at the record books, they lost the World Series to the Yankees in 47, 49, 52, 53. And when they did eventually win it in 55, many of their great stars were gone. And Kahn in his book almost treats it as an afterthought. And so he says, Lee Keegan isn't the best player never to win an All-Ireland. Mayo aren't the greatest team never to win it. They're both much more than that. They were Gaelic football's boys of summer. So he's firmly in the camp that says this team was great, Keegan was great, and All-Ireland does not really... the lack of one does not diminish what they brought to the party. He mentions Cork, Donegal, Kerry, Tyrone teams which won All-Irelands in 10, 12, 14, 21. He said, put them together, they don't make the same impact as the Mayo team, which couldn't win one. I'm of that opinion too, broadly. And yet if you come across someone who crosses their arms, almost in Roy Keane simplistic fashion, and says, but they didn't win, it can be hard to argue that point too strongly back.
But it does come down to what is sport for? What are we watching it for? What are we doing it for? And we touched on it a little bit even with Liverpool earlier. Like
these are playing it to win. We're watching it for different reasons, perhaps.
Yeah, but ultimately, what's left? Like, what's left when everything else goes? And this is the point of Sweeney's piece. Like, what is left when all that goes? Like, it's
you get to go on Tommy Tiernan and say, yeah, look, I won 15 All-Irelands. I was all right.
But I wasn't that great a player anyway.
Yeah. I don't know what's left.
But it's all those memories, those moments are kind of what it's all about. Now, obviously, if you're Dublin and you win everything, you have those too.
Yes.
But the idea that it's just binary, I think, is wrong. And I think there is a glory in it. And it's like Jimmy White is a person I thought of reading this piece as well. The idea that Jimmy White did nothing in snooker,
or isn't a great player.
Yeah, or wasn't involved in. Would he swap what he did for
Peter Ebdon?
Yeah, and winning a couple of world championships, 1810 or something like that, that nobody really remembers. Or would you want, we would want Jimmy White to have won it, but we wouldn't want Jimmy White to have won it.
And never have had the Jimmy
White that we had. And it's the same with Mayo.
No, I take the point. So, Tommy, would you rather have been a Cork player who won that All-Ireland in 2010 or a Mayo player of the last decade?
I'd be the Cork player.
He's a winner. The man's a winner.
I thought he was another better man.
Yeah.
You've changed, Tommy.
No, what I thought about was Johan Cruyff, who not directing. I don't think it was a direct quote, but who used to say that actually Holland won the 1974 World Cup because we're the team everybody remembers.
Yeah.
And I think there's definitely something in that. But it comes back to something I often thought about with the whole Stephen Kenny debate. Not that we're getting into that there's a difference, and you what you just touched upon there, Joe, is that why we're watching sport. I think a lot of Ireland fans are watching, the Ireland team for different reason than former internationals are watching it. And if you had Paddy Andrews sitting in here with us, and you made a contention that Mayo were the team of the era, and they're the ones that were most in our hearts, he'd probably, you just go, lads, because for people who are at that absolute sharp edge, that thing of winning the thing, or the thing, that's where they're looking at their sort of energy is focused on all that, whereas we're looking at something that's as fans and people who are covering it or writing columns about it, as Eamon Sweeney does, we're looking at what the thing that's kind of filled our hearts most over that era, and it's pretty hard not to say that it's been the Mayo team. And I think actually what Keegan seemed to sort of embody was the guy who you kind of think, and look, people who know him better and have covered a lot closer than me have said this, that it didn't, there's some players who you kind of think, oh God, like they'll always be haunted by that, and it'll always be there, that they just don't have that. He just looked like he left the fray like he entered it, happy-go-lucky, a sort of a force of nature. Like this, the photo with his daughter and the beaming smile, and on the picture, that's your sort of image of how he leaves it, and with all the memories, and and that's the Boys of Summer thing, isn't it? It's the romantic. That's the great romantic sports book.
I would love to get a sense of the inter-county players who've won All Irelands and aren't as celebrated as this Mayo team. And again, do they look at Mayo with great admiration and think, no, they were proper, they're serious? Or did they look at it and think, what a load of bullshit, the way everyone goes on about that Mayo team? Show me a winner. Again, it might be. I think there'd be a split. I think there must be a lot of respect across amongst inter-county players.
How many finals did Mayo get to? Like they weren't.
I don't know. Keegan was in 6, 7 if you include replays. So
it's not as if they were getting. Like that's the thing. Like you can, if you wanted. Okay, they didn't win All Irelands, but like Paul Flynn wrote about him for the currency for us this weekend. He's made that point. You don't get a bye to finals.
True.
They're winning. They're winning big matches.
Some of their semi-final performances were.
So like it's not,
and they fell short against the greatest team.
Yeah, as Eamon Sweeney puts it, that Dublin were the greatest team in the history of the game. Mayo played well enough to beat anyone except the greatest team in the history of the game. So
something that I interviewed Philly McMahon recently on Virgin Media, and tried to get a little bit sort of Roy Keane-ish in that he opened the door a little bit into what they thought of Mayo, and one thing he did sort of let slip that he seemed to feel was that the whole thing around Mayo with the fans and the just the scale of the hysteria around it. I kind of got the impression, and he rode back on it a bit and kind of said, well, look, we just made the right, it fell our way in the end. But I thought he seemed to be suggesting that that maybe that whole thing in those crucial moments was just got too massive.
Yeah. There is something about it when you're in the stadium, and it feels like every person there is a Mayo fan. It's more than just a scream.
Whereas the Dublin thing was all about cold.
Yes.
What was Colin Cooper said? It's like you're not there when you're playing. They were able to. Sort of,
they're like putting a hand in the air in possession to do the recalibration and get in position. Mayo lads are like, do it for my father.
Tears.
Yeah. We are so out of time. We didn't get to the FAI. It was basically Roy Barrett's interviews, but we'll come to the FAI again, I dare say, at some point in the future. Tommy Martin of Virgin Media Television, Dion Fanning, Associate Editor with The Currency. Lads, that was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.